Welcome at round 3 of the Candidates 2024 bot edition, where the bots of the actual candidates battle it out for the one and only spot against the world champion Ding Liren for the world championship next year. But after the first 2 rounds, both Caruana and Firouzja are leading together. 2 out of 2. And it's a super clash because they're playing against each other today. Watch what happened. Firouzja started with the white pieces with d4, and it entered into a queen's gambit, and to be exactly a Slav with the knight f3. This is a very common position, reached so many times, nothing new for both of them. They played it also very quickly, and after bishop d3 we have a very strong diagonal here with the queen and the bishop. That's very common in these kind of situations. A castle, castle. Okay, we have reached these lines very often. Bishop to d2, and here the move h3. Not very active. Better would have been, for example, to just, move your rooks and keep on developing. But okay, h3 also not too harming. And a3. Here, Caruana decided to play the knight to e4, going for a round of exchanges. But Firouzja declines. He could have taken, of course, doesn't do that. And this is a better position for black, actually. Pieces are quite active. This bishop already has a nice diagonal, so that's good. And basically you trade off the bishop here. That's good for black. And let's see how the players develop the game a bit further. Nice rooks over here for Caruana. But nothing decided yet. Perhaps going for c5 at some point in this position. And you can see that it's hard for Firouzja to break with the pawns. That's why he plays the knight to f3, perhaps to go here with the knight. Maybe in the long term here. But of course this bishop is still protecting this field for now. Knight e4. There was already a knight on the square before. Now the second knight comes in, and this time Firouzja takes. Caruana takes back and goes here with the knight. And what if you take this pawn at some point? Well, there will be a theme during this game. Caruana basically threatens to take this pawn. So you have to decide what to do. Will you go to f1 or h1? F1 will be the better position because you can get out at some point, as there are not a lot of defenders of the white's position on this side of the board, right? But Firouzja goes to h1, and you're quite vulnerable over here. A thematic move is to bring your rook in at some point to this row and also join the attack. Perhaps that's something which we will see later. Knight to f1, bringing in some defenders, perhaps going here, but that's not a good move now because you will chop it off. And here Caruana decides to break the position with the move c5. And Firouzja makes a blunder by taking on e4. And why is this a bad move? Well, we will see this because Caruana played the move bishop to f5, pinning the knight. And you have to act, you have to defend the knight, and then this pawn is hanging. So you will simply win a pawn back, with the result that you will have 2 passers on this side of the board, which we will see. So after f3, takes, 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 you attack the rook has to move. And then, as I said, these pawns will start moving. And yes, in pawns we're equal, but these passed pawns are really strong. And then queen c7, trying to create some threats. Bishop to d7, defending also, but also helping the pawns to advance. And by the way, you cannot take, right? Because this pawn is being protected by the queen. So no board as gambit here, obviously. Bishop to f5, and after the move here, attacking, creating some space. Firouzja forgot that, as we said, this rook came here to join the attack. And here we have a brilliant move, taking this pawn. That's what Caruana did. Takes back, check, the knight has to come in between. And now the rook slides in. And this pawn now is undefended, because this rook pins the knight as well. Queen to c2, and you can take the pawn. Queen to g2, helping the defense, and exchanging the queens is not advised at this point. Best move would have been queen f4, and after, for example, rook f1, queen e3 and queen f3, you exchange. And then this pawn hangs in the end, which is very important. This knight is bad, and this pawn is also not too strong at the moment, so you have to defend it. But yeah, black is like 4 pawns up against a weak knight, so it's a very strong position for black. This is what Caruana should have played. Instead, in this position, he took on e4, which is not a good move, because then you basically exchange the queens. And now rook c8 with a check, and you have to defend. And this bishop is very weak. It's hard to defend it. Perhaps a rook will join forces at some point. So black is somewhat on the defense now. And remember, Caruana already sacrificed a bishop. Now to c3, the rook goes to e3. King g2. This is a big mistake. Because here, Firouzja had the option to play the move d5 and trying to get a promotion at some point. Not played. Instead, rook here, and after the move knight to d5, attacking the rook, and also trying to get a check here, because for example, if the rook would go here, this is check and checkmate. Watch out. So you have to cover this row, and that's also what Caruana did with a check. And then now playing f5, opening up the position so your king can escape. But f5 is a big blunder in this position. Why? Well, you can simply win the game with some moves here. It's a forced win. And knight to f1 is not the best move, but the winning move was rook to e1. You will join forces over here, and you cannot take this knight because then this rook hangs, right? So after rook here, black plays king to f7, then you give a check, then the king has to go forward, and then you bring in the rook over here. And if the bishop goes here, for example, then you have rook check, you go to the side, and then you have a great fork over here. The king has to go here, you take the rook with the check even, takes back, yeah, and this is completely winning for white, obviously. Not seen by Firouzja, perhaps because of the time trouble. Both were in. And then knight to f1. Yeah, so this was the wrong move. And after rook to b3, Firouzja played the move king to e2. Another blunder. Rook to c1 would have been better. Because, for example, after check, you hide, and now you bring in the rook. You go on the offense. And that's what Firouzja forgot to do multiple times in this game. But after king e2, there's a check here, king comes forward, the pawn hangs. But it's still interesting, because Caruana still has these passers. And okay, the bishop is passive, but it's not pinned anymore, so it can move at some point again. Check. Here you cannot take it, because then you would take back. And you cannot really stop. Well, you can stop it, for example, with knight here, but then you give a check. You take the knight, and then you promote. So instead, Firouzja played rook c7 check. King goes forward. You have to move the knight because it was attacked. b5, trying to advance the passers. Rook to b7, trying to get behind the pawn, but the pawn will just continue moving. Rook to a7. Yeah, now it's a bit too late. This pawn was already trying to get a promotion here. b3. And this pawn is protected by the bishop, right? So this is a completely winning position for Caruana now. Check. King to g8. And now this would not be a good move, because b1, and after, for example, d5, yeah, you will promote with b2 at some point. Knight to c4, and now you simply go to a2, protecting this pawn now twice. And yeah, here Firouzja tried to go for the promotion, because if you would take, for example, you just promote. Rook here. And the game went on for a few more games, but here in this position, Firouzja decided to take the pawn, but now you have a great check here, giving a check and taking the knight. You have to move away the king, and you can take the rook, and yeah, you can take the rook back. But with these 2 pawns and this pawn already being here, it's a lost position. And Firouzja resigned. 3 points for Caruana. And Firouzja staying on 2 points. That brings us to the second game of this round. Vidit, the only player with 1.5 points out of 2 rounds, against Pragg. Like I said, first 3 rounds, 3 Indian matchups. Knight f3, knight f6. Interesting game. c4. We move into some kind of English opening. Take. And this is a Catalan check. We bring him between the bishop. The bishop either goes back or you play pawn to a5 like Pragg did. And after a3 you get back the bishop and you will gobble up this pawn. We've seen this kind of positions before, but not knight to c6. We've seen, I believe it was bishop to d7 in another game. Takes, also playable. Queen here trying to exchange queens. White, of course, declines, wants to win the game, needs to win the game. But yeah, after queen e5, you sort of have to exchange the queens, because if you go here, then we repeat positions. So takes, and the knight takes back. Bishop to f4, attacking this pawn. How you're gonna defend it? With bishop to d6. And here e3, protecting this pawn. And here Vidit decided to reroute the knight to this square, perhaps going here. Let's see. After the move g5, you have to decide, will I go here, for example, or take? Well, Vidit takes the bishop. Black is slightly worse, but has an active knight here. This bishop still needs to develop. Knight c3, developing. d5, and rook f to c1. A very modest game so far. g4. This is a mistake by Pragg. Better would have been to reroute the knight. So for example, going here and stabilizing the knight on this square. This would have been quite a good position for Pragg, but instead went for the move g4, and now you kind of fix your position. You cannot ever break with f4, so there's not really any counterplay left on the king side for black. And here Vidit decides to take off this knight. And when you take back, there is some knight's room to go here, for example. And if you would take the knight, then this rook is very active. For example, after bishop d7, this knight also has a great outpost here, right? So great position for white. But that's not what Vidit did. So he left the opportunity of taking another win, and he went knight to f4 instead. Not a good move. Bishop d7. And here king to g2. Very slow. Bring the rook into the game. b3. And here e5. Attacking the knight and the pawn. And white needs to decide what to do. d to e5 is the best move. Takes back. Obviously. But here knight to d4. Not the right move. Better would have been rook to c5, entering black's camp here. And also doubling up the rooks at some point. This would have been a great position for Vidit once more. But knight to d4, not a good move. The knight comes in this square. And that's a great square for black's knight. Bring in the rook. Takes, and this pawn is quite weak, right? And at some point it has to move to be protected by the knight, or the bishop, of course, is active. You can put the bishop in front of the pawn, for example. Rook to d1. And here, bring the rook forward and perhaps doubling up. Takes. And here, the move h3. Rook c1 would have been the better move, trying to get in black's camp. Not played. Instead, like I said, h3. Takes. Rook to c1. And here, white should have taken the pawn, and after takes back, you bring the rook to c5. So in these kind of positions, in the endgame, you really want to be active. Attack your opponent's pawns first. But if you go passive with the move a4, for example, you leave room for black to exchange rooks. And now you're slightly worse because of this pawn, which perhaps will become a passer at some point. King goes forward, check, check, check. And this knight was rerouting all the time, but forgetting that at some point this pawn will move forward. This pawn has to make a choice, and then this will be a passer. Let's see what happens. Bishop b7, knight goes here, attacking this pawn. But now, like I said, f4. When you take, you have a great passer over here, and that's the pawn which will decide the game. And this pawn is not so fast, because the bishop protects this square, and the knight cannot go here on here to protect this pawn from promoting. And if you ever would go here, then you chop it off, and this pawn cannot be protected. King g2. Yeah, and in this position, after the move h4, Vidit resigned. He had so many opportunities to win the game, but he didn't and lost in the end. Horrible for him, but great win for Pragg. Then, the third game of the round. Abasov bot with the white pieces against Nakamura bot. Let's see what happens. e4, this is a crazy and wild game. c5, f4, f4. What is this? The McDonald attack. It's not McDonald's, but McDonald attack. d5 attacking the center of the board. Very active. You know, white is already weak on this side. Takes back with the queen. The queen is already active on move 3. Knight to c3. Often you go back to prevent a lot of attacks on the queen, but that's not what Nakamura bot does. Goes to d6 to give a check, and Abasov moves in his queen instead of developing his pieces. No, he moves in the queen. Knight to c6. Knight to f3. What's next? Developing. And now queen to e3. What is this? Moving the queen from here to here, and now Nakamura bot is done with it and takes the queen. Because he sees this weakness and goes knight to b4. Very interesting game. I'm not sure if there's anything like it we've seen before, but king to d2 and the bishop comes in, and now you can give a check. The knight has to go back. Well, of course, you also could have gone back with the bishop, but then you simply take the bishop, for example. But after the knight goes back, you go back, and here you can always move the bishop either away, or you can take this bishop, and here you can also protect the bishop. So this is not really a very threatening move. Now you just simply take the bishop, and the king protects this square. So after you take the bishop, you kick away the knight, and this is basically equal position. It went on for a while. I will go through it very quickly, but nothing much happened basically, because this is an easy draw, and Nakamura held this position quite easy, and this position the players agreed to a draw, and both moving to 1 point. Then the last game of the round. Gukesh bot against Nepo bot, both on half a point. Let's see what they did. This is quite an interesting game with some nice tactics involved. d4, going for a King's Indian defense. We've seen this a few more times. Knight being active in the center, you can kick it away with e4. That's also what Gukesh did. You need to make a choice. Often you go back here. That's also what Nepo did. This could be an interesting move, a4, but h3 also fine, preventing the bishop from pinning your knight to the bishop. Also good would have been to fianchetto your bishop, what Nepo will do in the end. Now, anyways, castles. This pawn perhaps can be a weakness over time. Queen goes forward, attacking the weakness now twice. Bishop to f4, not the right move, because a better move would have been queen to c2. And here the interesting thing is you cannot really take, because if you take back and the queen goes here. But what is the winning move in this position? Rook to d1, attacking the queen and the rook. And you cannot really protect the rook, so you have to go here, and then your rook hangs. And here, bishop f4. and developing the knight. Knight to e2. Not a good move, because yeah, you protect the pawn, but you can pin the knight. And then you will win this pawn eventually, or at least here it could have happened. The move c5, a good move. Here you could have simply taken the pawn, and after rook goes to d1, you could have played c5. Still, white is better here because of this pawn and some active pieces here. But that's not how it went, because here after c5, the best move in this position would be to sacrifice the exchange, because after d5, the rook takes and takes back. You have a great center. You have a great bishop pair. This rook will come back into the game and the knight will go here. This is a winning position for white. Not happened. But instead, Gukesh played knight to e5. Not a good move. But Nepo didn't play the right move. Best move would have been to take on d4 with the queen and to simply win this pawn, because now if you play here, then you can, for example, go here. But Nepo took on e4, but this one you can simply take back, and yeah, these are double pawns, but in the center of the board. Quite good pawns. And you don't really want to move your pawn here, because then your bishop comes in here, and perhaps also the queen later on. So that would have been a good position for white. After the move queen to d3, Gukesh tried to prevent the exchange of queens and make some sort of attack. The bishop perhaps goes here, or the queen goes here via these squares, perhaps a bishop to g5 and perhaps here over time. And that's also why Nepo was stubborn and tried to exchange the queens once again. Queen goes forward, knight to b4, bishop to f3. That was not really a good move. Better would have been to go on the attack with h4. Perhaps the bishop goes here and continue with h5. Bishop f3 and the knight goes in. And yeah, probably this bishop sooner or later will be exchanged. Attack it and pin it. But you can also protect it with the move c5. And after takes, the queen can go to c7, for example. And here e6 will be met by takes, g takes f4, and now you can take here, for example. And this is quite of an equal position after king takes f7. Doesn't look too bright for black, but still, according to the computer, this is a drawn position. c5 takes with the queen, then the move e6, breaking the center and asking black a lot of questions. What do you do here? Well, f6, the queen takes on c5, and that's quite good for black. Finally, the strong queen is gone. e5, and now you can take this pawn. Basically, Nepo has dealt with all issues, right? So bishop to e3, takes, and yeah, the material is equal. The game went on for a bit longer. I will fast forward a bit, but in the end, they reached to the agreement to draw the game. Brings us to the standings after round 3. Caruana leading with 3 points. Firouzja number 2 with 2 points. Vidit and Pragg both on 1.5 points. And the rest trailing with 1 point.